what I want to do now is to set this challenge and these indicators of the need for change within the context of democracy. So I have to step back, and I would like to do some basic defining of democracy. First thing I think that is so important to know about democracy is that human beings, by nature, and now we know this even from science, that by nature human beings are relational. They require each other. We need to connect to each other in order to survive and to grow and to give life meaning. So by our nature, we need to be together. And because of this human need, we organize systems to meet that need. The need for family, for faith, for community, for work, for learning, and for governance. Within these systems, we make rules about what we think should happen. What does the good person look like? What does the good situation look like? And so we have the function that is key to democracy within each system, the rule-making function, in order to produce the good. And democracy literally means rule by the people. And so this rule-making function that's happening within systems, if we do not link that to the meaning of democracy, there is a very big disconnect. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I want to step back a little bit and just talk about the history of democracy as we may know it, about it. There are many, many cultures throughout all of human history have had democratic practices within them, but we tend to think about the formal function of democracy coming from the Greeks, and we think of it as a Western concept. And in particular, the 6th century BC Athenians are credited with the notion of democracy. Well, in Athens, governance was grounded in the identity of citizenship. So you immediately get the idea of citizenship as a role tied to the function of democracy as a basis for governance. And the citizenship gave you the right to decide and to govern the larger society, but it always came with a set of obligations. So citizenship was never devoid from the notion of rights, and obligations were never separated. Now, we all know that in Athens there were very few people that were given that right to be able to be a citizen, and democratic movements then from that time on always struggled around this question: who is competent to govern for the common good? And where does that competency, where is it produced? And how do you carry out the role, given the circumstances of each generation? So all democratic movements have always been premised on those questions. Who is competent to govern for the common good? Where is that competency developed? And how do you do it? And the who question always is very important, because as we all know, the answer to that question has been broadened through the democratic movements themselves. Now, American democracy has its own particular story. It's a story that most of us imagine, and it would be true, comes out of the European experience and understanding of democracy. But American democracy was produced not only from those ideas or those experiences in Europe, but in their encounters with indigenous people. For one thing, there's evidence that the Iroquois nation helped produce a notion of confederacy that was taken and written into the way that we structured governance in the early years. And also, our understanding of democracy was shaped by those who were considered not capable of governance. So the whole notion of who was excluded, a whole question of slavery, the issues of civil rights movement, but prior to that, many women's movements were always asking that question: who is capable? of governing. And there were always answers for why some people weren't, or there are always, justifications for why some people weren't. The American Revolution, Civil War, continuing immigration, civil rights movement, women's movement, all extended rights of citizenship to areas that had not been, where that right had not been extended before. But the important part of the formation of American democracy was that the right to participate was fought for with a very strong consciousness of obligation that one was to govern for the common good. So the notion of the rights of citizenship was never separated from the obligation of governance. So one of the questions that we always ask people is, when you hear the word democracy, what are the words that come to your mind? So essentially what we're trying to do with civic organizing is remind people they already have a concept. I mean, human beings by their nature have concepts. They think about words like democracy, or if you ask them, they will have an answer to that question. Or talking with people, if you don't get that idea out that they already have, you can't create an environment in which you would then offer a new idea or an extended idea. Many people will say, one person, one vote. So they understand democracy as really a method by which we have structured it. Forgetting that democracy is fundamentally, or maybe never having been taught, that democracy is fundamentally a set of principles that are assumed to be good for everybody. But these principles, by their nature, are in tension with each other. So the way I was taught about this was credit to Michael Martunian. You have a tension between conscience and law. And I'll give you just an example of that. American Revolution is a good example. The American Revolution was, one of the key factors within the American Revolution was the role of the middle class. And the middle class tends to, if they're a business, commercial class, they tend to really require law, stability. And so it was pretty tough for these folks to actually be taking on England, because England was the established law. So they were having to rebel against established law, which with that group of people was not exactly a natural thing for them to do. But they had to come up with an argument, which was true to them too, that if in fact the law is unjust, one must function from their conscience. So there are some things that are higher than law, and that they are defined by conscience. And these two are in tension with each other. Too much conscience, if everybody just gets to say they don't like the law, then you're going to have license and you're going to have chaos. Too much law, and you're going to have authoritarian, rigid, unworkable society, right? So another set of tensions would be freedom and equality. Too much freedom, especially if this freedom is possible for those in society who have the most, too much freedom is going to impact the common good, right? Because I'll be free to have whatever I can get. But if you have simply equality, you lose freedom, because if everybody has the same, if everything is the same, and rules support sameness, you lose that freedom to experiment, to grow, to individualism, the thing that is also a key part of human nature. And so so there's a tension between the two. My freedom can impact quality and does impact the common good. Every decision that I make impacts the common good. And if I tend to not think that way, I'm not in a very good place to discern what would be a good decision. But another way that you think about equality would be, this might be a communist system where everything was attempted to be the same, and where individual freedom was touted as something that was destructive to society. But the two, they have no meaning outside of themselves. When you hear people arguing that what they want is freedom, but they're not talking about equality, freedom to do what? There'd be no context with which they would be exercising freedom. So these two things are in tension with each other. The other is unity, diversity. So too much of what is too much of the sameness or unity will take away from our ability to be different. Does that make sense? Too much diversity, if diversity is the end point, then what you have is apartheid. You have absolutely everything is separate from it. There is no unifying container or unifying force with which to contain diversity. So you need a balance, tension between these. And the other thing might be our private life and our public life. Too much emphasis on private life takes away the emphasis on what we need to produce the common good or a public good. Too much emphasis on the commons suppresses, again, individual rights, human rights, things which define us as in terms of our private lives. So, this is the basis for freedom of religion, for instance. You've got to have freedom of conscience, which freedom of religion would be considered your private value, and so you need to be able to hold these things in tension in a democracy. There's no given. So the common good is found in that tension. Now, how do you do that? How do you find the common good in that? This is what we mean by a civic infrastructure. Because my argument for what I need to be free for will not be the same as somebody else's. So you have my notion of what we should all stand for will not be the same as what somebody else will. This comes right down to ordinary life, where my freedom to dress the way I want to versus the company's desire to have somebody in a uniform. So day to day we live in these tensions between what people consider goods, and these goods apply to everybody. And so in order to find the common good, you have to have a decision-making process in which you bring people together who have different points of view, and then a process of argument and public argument and discernment and agreement and ability to move forth on those places of common agreement. So this is what we mean by a civic infrastructure. Now, the role that we play in terms of being able to do this argument is in the role of citizenship. So that's that universal role that everybody has that obligates them to get into this tension. So this notion that somehow this is not my work is like, well, so what is the work of citizenship then, if it isn't to be in this tension? So becoming conscious that the choices that we make every day within democratic tensions impacts the common good, not only gives meaning to and grandeur to the notion of citizenship, but the process of being a good citizen helps produce, not a good citizen, a competent citizen, helps produce a healthy family, a sustainable community, productive workplace, a meaningful life, and increased capacity to solve public problems. And developing that capacity is necessary if democracy is going to be a basis for governance. So what we're arguing with civic organizing is this development, this ability to be able to develop the mindset and the character and the skill set and the language and the understanding of citizenship has to be done. It's on-the-job training. It has to be done in every institution, in all the social systems that meet the human need for relationship. And so we imagine all institutions to be citizenship schools, schools for democracy in the 21st century. That it is not enough it's an old conception to imagine that maybe you can teach somebody to be a good citizen if they vote and they pay taxes and they, obey the laws. No, you have to be able to learn how to be in the tension between goods in every institution that you're in. And then to be able to associate that role and that function with the concept of policy making. So now I've gotten to that place where we've defined the need of democracy, what it is, the role of citizenship within that, within democracy, and now linking this to the function of policymaking.